Okay.
Good afternoon and welcome to this exciting Lisbon Speed Talk. Today, as everybody knows, is the US election happened yesterday and results are not definitive yet. And it is my great pleasure to welcome Professor Michael Lewis-Beck to this Lisbon Speed Talk. Professor Lewis-Beck is a Distinguished Professor of Political Science at the University of Iowa, and he has been working on electoral behavior in the United States for his whole career, dedicated to voting, but also to forecasting, to the role of economics in elections. He has served at the board of the most important political science journals, including American Journal of Political Science. He's also an expert on methods and has published hundreds of articles and several books on this topic. So I'm delighted to welcome Mike, who is also a friend, to this Lisbon Speed Talk. And before we start, let me just say that I would also we welcome questions that anybody would like to ask. They can write them in the chat, and these questions can be either in Portuguese or English, and I will then ask them to Mike Lewis-Beck. So, Mike, what a momentous day for us to be talking. This is exciting. So. The first thing I would like to ask you is how, from Iowa, where you are today and this morning, how are you looking at these results? Do you see a clear path for victory for Joe Biden, or do you think it's too early to say that this will actually happen?
First, I want to say thanks for being here, Marina, and I look forward to hearing your questions and those in the audience. It's a very exciting time, and I'm happy to be able to broadcast to my European friends like yourselves. The question on all of your minds is who's going to win the presidential race. That's the foremost question, and I would say with a considerable amount of confidence that Biden will win. He will be declared the winner. The question is when that will happen. I think it will actually happen before the end of the week. So I'm optimistic in that regard, and I would encourage you to be optimistic. I base that not only. I don't base that on that immediate forecast is not based on wishful thinking or that my grandmother's knee is feeling fine or something like that. It's based on my looking at the evidence that I've seen before and the evidence that's coming in. I think there's every reason to believe that Biden is on the path to winning.
This is a very specific sui generis election because of the fact that this time around there were almost over 100 million, is it right? 100 million ballots that were cast before the polling day. So how does that change the way results come in and how we can be sure of who is winning?
Right. Very good question. Ideally, and this is an interesting question about, when should an election be on one day or should it be spread across days? And this is an ongoing problem. Before COVID came along, and I actually think in an ideal democracy, which obviously we don't have, no country in the world is ideal, no democracy is ideal, that the election day should be on a single day, just like your birthday. Now, but that's been changing in many places where you've always had absentee balloting, which means if you're in a foreign country or you're in the Army, for example, you can mail your ballot from your Army base or your foreign post. Then we have introduced, because of COVID, we've introduced a big time mailing a ballot, and that's for health and safety of the people. And I totally understand that. We want people to vote, but we don't want them to get sick while they're waiting in line. So there's been this is the real difference. We have a huge amount of voting that's induced by COVID that's by mail. And and I want to say something which probably does confuse most of you, is that in the United States, the election rules are made by each state. So each state has a different way of handling the balloting. They're responsible for having a free and fair election and when something is counted. So like right now, a question is, what do you count first? Do you count the face-to-face ballots that were made yesterday on election day, or do you count the mail-in ballots? Do you count the provisional ballots? Do you count the absentee ballots? And every state traditionally has had a different time when they count the absentee ballots, for example, and this continues. Some states now are counting, they're counting first the people who balloted face-to-face, and then later they're doing the mail-in. In other states, they've started doing counting the mail-in, and some of them have began starting counting the mail-ins several days ago. So you see a different flow. They're basically, well, I think you could lump them together. They're the face-to-face. There's the flow of face-to-face ballots, which is the normal way you think of it, and then there's this flow of ballots which are not face-to-face. There's mostly mail-in, and that's a huge number.
But would it be fair? I've been hearing pundits say that for the mail-in ballots, that can be either because you voted in anticipation or you sent it by mail, that they tend towards the Democrats, that they are biased towards Biden, and especially in those states where the vote has not been called yet, the electoral college votes have not been called yet for either candidate. Is that true? And do you think that's true for Pennsylvania? Do you think that's true for Michigan? For Georgia? What can we expect in these states that have a large percentage of mail-in votes?
Yes.
Do we know?
It is true. What you said is the mail-in ballot gives advantage to Democrats, because one thing we know this in our own lives, it's not cost-free to vote. It takes time, and sometimes takes money, it takes thinking. There's costs to voting. So, and the people who pay the highest cost are the people who can least afford it. In other words, people who don't have much money, they don't have much time, they have to take care of kids at home, they're sick. And this group of people, which tend to be, they're disadvantaged in some way, also are more likely to vote Democratic. And this is something that's been known and is historic. It's just a historic pattern. This is not a sudden thing. So it's when Trump is worried about mail-in ballots costing him margin in his camp, he is correct. It will. So now when you watch these things come in. For example, Pennsylvania in particular is like they're coming in really late. They probably won't. I just heard the head of the big Republican, the lawyer who's planning on challenging the Pennsylvania balloting, but they'll probably have the results by, I think Friday they'll have them. That's pretty late. Michigan is another one. These states, yeah. So there's a lot of mail-in ballots yet to be counted, and these will swing for Biden. The only place where there's essentially kind of a random draw of late ballots is Nevada. It looks like they will be kind of a mix of different kinds for different reasons. They're not been counted yet. So you will expect to see what at the beginning. Those first people in face-to-face voting, and those were more Republicans are more likely to vote face-to-face. So there was a Trump lead, which is starting to diminish because the mail-in ballots come, and that's an accurate trend. Yeah. So and
that is why Trump said he wants to stop counting the votes, and he said that a few hours ago. I guess that's why. because he knows that it doesn't the mail-in votes do not favor him. I wanted to ask you about polling, because when in Europe, we woke up this morning, both Florida and Texas had been declared that the electoral votes would go for Trump. And these were kind of unexpected because the polling there had suggested that Florida, I guess, could go either way, but even Texas could be pro-Biden. So this to introduce the issue of polls. How do you see the accuracy of polls? Is it too early to tell because we need to reach the end of the counting of the ballots until we count all the absentee ballots? Or what is your view? Are you with the skeptics that this is a return of 2016 in terms of accuracy? Or can we be more confident with the result?
Well, that is one of the most important questions, and the answer is yes, they're inaccurate. The polling enterprise has failed again. I have written a lot about this. The polls, as they're being done, are by and large done incorrectly. Not all polls, but the ones you see, the ongoing vote intention polls, that the ones you read in the newspapers, there's hundreds of these things. They're not done properly. It's a simple scientific fact that they are inaccurate, and we see it again clearly. And they're not just mildly inaccurate. I mean, they're shockingly inaccurate. So you see things like, wow, 7, 8, 10 points off, and this was what happened in 2016. And the industry said this was going to change, but there was really no clear evidence that they were going to change. Probably will want to return to this topic, but there are very specific reasons why these polls are not to be trusted, and it's really a disservice.
Well, can you just is it what are the problems with the polls concretely? What introduces the error? Is it because they are mostly online and they are not representative samples, or what are we looking at? Why these repeated mistakes?
Well, there are different modes of doing polling. The worst ones are the telephone polls, but also they're basically the telephone polls and the online polls. The problem comes down to a simple one, which is if you want to draw an accurate sample of a population, like the population is voters, you want to understand voters, you can't talk to every voter. So you draw a sample. To draw a sample, you somehow scientifically have to create a list of the voters, create a list of the population you're sampling. This is time consuming and money consuming. So people don't do it. This is one of the great misfortunes, is that the samples are not probability samples. Put it simply, they're not random samples of a list of the voters. So because they're not random samples,
right.
They have to guess how to adjust them, and they guess wrong. Go ahead.
I think this issue of the issue of the polls is an important one, but I wanted to ask you about the numbers that we are seeing and the mobilization for Trump, because seen from Europe, this is quite difficult to understand. We thought that we were convinced that the election would not be that close, and if there is a path to victory, it still seems that it will be pretty close. So how can we explain this mobilization pro-Trump in a time of pandemic, in a time where there was a huge economic slump, in a time of not counting Trump's personality? What explains, is it party identification that explains this mobilization?
Did I lose you there? Are we? Can you hear me?
Did you hear my question?
Yeah, so,
yes. Can you hear my question?
Yes, you were fading in and out a little bit, but I heard the question. So, well, one good thing is that a bad thing is that in the United States, generally at the presidential level, election participation is only about 50%, which is really disgraceful compared to European countries. In this election, participation, well, the latest estimate by Michael McDonald, who's quite the leading expert, is 67%. That's really tremendous. So a lot of people.
Amazing.
It's totally amazing because the system is very resistant to moving off that 50%. Now, so voters are mobilized, but it's not just Democratic voters getting mobilized, the Republican voters are mobilized. Now, why is that? Well, I'll tell you, I mean, okay, one of the things about being a political science that's fun is that you learn stuff, and then you can share this with people. So this is something I learned, is that the biggest thing holding people in place when they vote. I mean, why do people vote the way they vote? And Marina and I have done, we've done a lot of work on this. And I see Marina's faded off the screen there. I hope that she comes back. So Marina, you there? Jessica? So, well, I'll continue speaking. Okay, thank you, Jessica. Okay, I'm going to keep talking. The main thing that keeps people in place when they go to the voting booth is their party affiliation, in other words, which party they're attached to. In the United States, most people have a party attachment, and historically, basically, since people have asked people how they affiliate with parties, the Democrats have been the dominant party. The Democratic Party is the majority party. Now, this is a finding that I ran across recently from Gallup, and Gallup is one of the better survey organizations, and they were not polling about vote intentions. They were polling about party identification. So it was shocking to me. This is a shocking fact. This is the first time I've ever seen the polls where the number of Republicans and the number of Democrats who identify as even percentage. That is a shocker. So that tells me.
Why is that? Why is that a shocker? Because it used to be tilting towards.
It's always the Democrats always have. There's Democrats, Republicans, and independents. So if you just ask them straight out like that, the Democrats always have a larger percentage. I mean, always, I mean since 1948. So this is a huge change. Now, maybe it's just a blip in the series, but what it suggested to me was, I was alarmed when I saw this, and I'm seeing the fruits of some of that now. People are disaffecting. The Republican number didn't go up that much, but they're disaffecting from the Democratic Party. Now, that leaves the question of, well, why is this? I think Joe Biden and the Democrats had the wrong message this time. They didn't focus on valence issues. That is to say, they didn't focus on bread and butter issues. The main one being the economy. The economy is a total wreck, and that's due to Trump and Trump's handling of COVID. I mean, that is just a fact that's out there, and this is what should have been hammered home, and not this business about losing the soul of the nation, which I certainly am concerned about losing the soul of the nation. But people are more concerned about being able to pay their rent and buy groceries. And this was not really driven home. This is a strategic error, the same strategic error that Al Gore made in 2000 when he lost. The economy was on the side of the Democrats, and he did not emphasize it. He didn't, because he didn't like Bill Clinton. But the thing is,
it's true that we saw in the exit polls that whoever was more worried about the economy had tendency to vote Republican rather than Democrat, and they were commenting that it was Trump that was discussing the economy rather than the Democrats who were discussing COVID and racial issues.
Great example.
Okay, so I have a question here, which is rather to do with the Senate. So the question is, well, it doesn't really, no matter who will win the presidential election, isn't it as important that what will happen at the level of the Senate? And here, the message has been that the Senate will be held by Republicans, I guess. There was there was no turning that Senate majority, that is a Republican majority, towards Democrats. So can we look at the overall results a little bit more? How are you seeing what's going on at the level of the House and the Senate, and what that means for the presidency?
Okay, good question. The Senate, well, for Democrats, the good news is that they held on to the House.
Okay.
And so Nancy Pelosi will stay in charge, and Nancy Pelosi is a powerful force. She will stay in power in the House, and the House will be Democratic. That's a very important check. We do have a checks and balances system, which is getting strained, but that's an important check against Trump. The Senate, it was hoped that the Senate would become Democratic, but it is not. And in fact, it's and also in the House, actually, Democrats lost seats on net. Now, what's going on there? And this is, I just figured this out today. This is my first thought about this, but I think what we're seeing here is a revival of split ticket voting, because I think we're going to have Biden is going to win the presidency, but in the legislature, Democrats actually lost ground. So that means at the personal individual voter level is that people are splitting their votes. So there's Republicans who are voting Republican for their congressman or congresswoman, but they're voting against Trump because they don't like Trump. So one heartening thing about that is that there are some independents and Republicans who see that Trump is a dangerous person, and he's robbing the Treasury and every other crime he's committed. They see that and they're disaffecting from him. So that's a divided government situation.
Right. And from what we see in the results, we can see there's a probability that we will have a situation where Biden, there could still have the case that Biden wins the popular vote, but doesn't get the number of electoral college votes. We're looking at the results, and from Europe, we see clearly that the popular vote, Biden is ahead very, very by a good margin, but it's the electoral votes that don't come through easily. And right. The question is about electoral reform. I guess this is as impossible as ever, given the polarization of the U.S. electorate, but would it be an important thing to have? How legitimate is it to have elections where there's a very clear winner at the level of the popular vote, and then the question is always the electoral college that is very disproportional in terms of population?
Well, actually, I have some good news there. I think that Biden right now he has the majority of the popular vote, and that will increase. And no one has ever lost the electoral college. It's like 51% now. It's going up. If he hits 52, he'll win the electoral college. That will just happen. And so that's what we're watching now. So I think those things are going to converge. He's going to get more electoral votes, and he's getting more. You think about this. He's getting more and more popular votes. And so his popular vote share is going to increase. And importantly, it's 50% of everybody voting, not just 50% of the two major parties. 50%, it's over that, it's 51%, and it's going up. It's probably closer to 52 now. So if you're watching for markers, that's something to watch. When his popular vote hits 52, and his electoral vote now is very close. You can sort through the states. I don't know when we might want to do. Well, if you sort through the states that are swing now, they're not all, but it's simple enough to put together a very likely scenario where he will get the electoral votes.
One thing that's often argued is that the demographic shifts in the US naturally favor the Democrats. That is because of diversity of ethnic backgrounds of population, especially. And yet, time and time again, it doesn't really play out like that. And in this election, it seems like the Latinos that Democrats believed might be very much pro-Biden have, for instance, not delivered that result in Florida or Texas. So, is there a mistake in this argument that demographics will deliver for the Democrats? What is missing from this picture? What is not being understood here?
Part of this problem, in the newspapers, they just live for the moment, and they often mislead the public. I have to say, this is an example. This comes up every year. When will the Hispanics, they're going to be Republicans? They're not Republicans. They're overwhelmingly Democratic. That's just true, time and time again. This comes up because of, people don't pay attention, but the Cuban Americans in Florida are rabid Republicans. That's because they fled with Batista and Batista followers to Florida, and they hate Castro. They are totally Republican. Those are the only Republican Latinos, Latinas, and not virtually as a group. The rest of the Hispanic, Spanish, Portuguese-speaking people in the United States are overwhelmingly they vote Democratic, and same in Texas. I mean, Texas has been so Republican. The fact that you could discuss that there might be a takeover, Democratic takeover, is actually heartening. And now the problem is Hispanics. They're disadvantaged in different ways. Like some of them are not been in the country that long. They tend to be lower income. Sometimes their English is not so good, so they don't vote as much. But that's changing, and there is this demographic shift, and the Republicans are aware of that. These groups, these disadvantaged groups, know they're disadvantaged. I did a study with Mary Stegmeyer about Latin American immigrants. They are overwhelmingly Democratic, and what do they care about most? They care about economic issues. They want to better their lives for their kids and their parents.
Okay. Let's take on this economic issue, because if we consider the forecasts that were organized by political scientists and also by you, the economic downturn that has been dramatic in 2020 predicted a blue sweep, predicted a huge win or a big win for Biden. And we are not seeing that.
Right.
So how is it that we are in a situation where if Biden wins, it's very narrowly, and the Senate is kept for Republicans, and even, as you said, the House is also a trajectory where Democrats lose some important seats?
Well, you're right, and speaking specifically, it's a forecasting question, and so the economy in the United States is in free fall, and the first 6 months of the election year, the gross national product shrunk 5.5%. That's 11% annualized. That's a dramatic. It's like near depression levels. So when you put that in a model, that's such a big number, it's so different. You can't, if you put that in an equation, it'll just basically explode. In other words, like Trump would owe the electorate votes, which he actually, that might not be a bad thing. But anyway, so you have to figure out, well, that's really big, but can it be that negative? And so this was a real problem that every forecaster had. They had to say, they had such an extreme case that they had to adjust for it. And they made calculations. I mean, Charles Tien and we made calculations, and we did adjust it downward, but we didn't adjust it downward as, I just did some stuff this morning. If we had adjusted it down, made it important, but not as dramatic, this is a judgment call based on informed expert opinion. Mm-hmm. That would have been different. But but even in that case, so there's an economic effect. It's not as big as, you're right to say, it's not as big as it should be. There's some perceptual fog there. There's some perceptual fog, which is generated partly by Biden not talking about the economy, and also partly by Trump's incessantly misinforming the public. But at this point, I have to agree with. I'm baffled as to why it didn't have a bigger effect. I'll get to the bottom of it. Just check in with me in a few weeks. I'll give you.
We need time. We need time to chew on these results, and they are not even in yet.
Right.
Okay, there are questions here in the chat about the solidity of American democracy given this election. So we have the president that is saying that he will not accept defeat, that this has been fraudulent before votes counted. Then Adam Przeworski has also written in Le Monde Diplomatique that democracy in the US is rotten. Paul Krugman on Twitter this morning said this was a terrible result because in any case, the country is very, very divided, and the Senate goes to Republicans. Democrats hold the House, but weaker. We can see that Biden did not decisively win, and so what does that mean in terms of the health of U.S. democracy?
Well, it's certainly okay. The major concern is if Trump stays in office. I don't think he will win the election, and I think when the votes are counted, it will be so clear that he will have no choice but to leave. And I am sanguine about that, in that he will have to leave because there'll just be so many votes against him that he can't stay. Because for one thing, he's not a brave man. He's actually a coward. So when he's faced with this overwhelming loss, I mean, he's going to step aside. I mean, my scenario is that like someone who's brave, like the cleaning lady in the White House, will come up and say, Mr. President, I've got to empty your wastebasket. Get out of here. So now that's the key thing, is that he's going to be gone. And I think he will be gone. In terms of like civil unrest, the breakdown of the system, I think that's alarmist. I have to say that. I mean, as concerned as I am, I think that's alarmist. I mean, and my good friends Paul Krugman and Adam Przeworski are, well, like many people, they're just really upset. And I mean, who's not upset? But I think the country is stronger than that. You look at the balloting now. I mean, it's peaceful. The election process in the country is peaceful on the whole. I mean, it's a big country. There's hundreds of millions of people voting. There's going to be little incidences, but it's been orderly. People voted. And we're used to voting. It's been an orderly process. I'm quite pleased with it. I don't think, roving bands of guys with automatic weapons roaming this. It's not happening. It's not. But we are not yet a banana republic. Now, this is my nightmare, is that we're going to turn into a banana republic. But that's just a nightmare. When I have a nightmare, I wake up and read. I watch The Big Lebowski. So, these are. It's back to like Roosevelt. The thing Franklin Roosevelt said during the Depression, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Anxiety and fear are rampant in this country, but that's a psychological condition, which, this
becomes real. It becomes real, but
it's real. But here's the deal. Institutions, what matters more than institutions is the character of the leaders. If you have leaders of integrity, the institutions in a democratic system will more or less work. I mean, we look across the globe, all these democratic countries, they all have different rules, but as long as you have people of integrity behind these things, leaders, they more or less work. So the problem that we have a criminal as president.
There is another. I think that it's good to be optimistic and that the system will work. And there's still many things to play here for sure. Let's see. Let's go back to this demography point, because somebody asked another question, Emilcar. This demographic shift. Depends a lot for it to make a difference in the polls. It depends a lot on this mobilization of the disadvantaged groups, correct? Right. So a lot of the Democratic campaign is about vote, please vote, go and vote. because these disadvantaged groups tend to vote less.
Right.
But given the huge amount of electoral participation that we had this time round, for instance, compared to the previous election, I guess the mobilization strategy worked completely, or not. Or does it, despite the fact that we have very high participation, it still doesn't mean that it still could be that the disadvantaged groups were not mobilized? How are you thinking about that?
Well, part of that, we talked about that a little bit. I mean, it's somewhat surprising that the Republicans are mobilizing to the degree that they are, but that's true. Now, one good thing about mobilization, it's about the young people. And the youth are, in this country, other countries, they don't vote. They talk a big game, but then they don't go vote. This time, the young people are really voting. And that's a big change. And in the United States, the young people, they want healthcare for all. They're left wing. They're for Bernie Sanders. They're very on the left. They're not down the road, middle of the road Democrats. They are on the left. And one of the problems, and I lay this at the feet of the Democratic Party, think about Biden. Who's Biden? I mean, he's like Clinton. He's like this whole stream of middle of the road Democrats who don't appeal to the needs of working class and less advantaged people. It's a straight, I mean, he's not an inspiring, Biden is a decent man, but he's not an inspiring candidate. He does not have progressive policies that would draw more people into the electorate. And this is a counterfactual, which I will throw out there. I think we would have done better. The Democratic Party would have done better if Sanders were allowed to run, because he would have gotten more, mobilized more people. But we'll never know.
But wouldn't he? It's a counterfactual, but he might have lost people on the center, and Trump would have been having a field day with all this, electing a socialist and all that.
I don't believe it. I mean,
it's a counterfactual. But anyway, let's speak about the pandemic. We've spoken about economics and how it had an effect or not. What impact can the pandemic have had? Did it function in favor of Trump to some extent, with some people, for maintaining the president in a time of national alarm in terms of public health? What might have happened here?
Well, two things. One thing, I mean, the president. Okay. The pandemic had a negative effect on Trump in that he never got out of the 40s in terms of his popularity. Here's an important fact. No president has ever been reelected when their popularity is as low as his popularity is. And one of the reasons that popularity is low is because he's not handling the pandemic with any authority or intelligence. Okay, that's the good news. The other side is he has also bred disrespect for the law and disrespect for science and disrespect for reality. He says there is no pandemic, and unfortunately, people have, since people don't want to have a pandemic, they want someone to tell them that there's really not a pandemic. And you see that, and well, for example, in Iowa, where I live, our governor is a toady for Trump, and we have the second highest infection rates in the country in Iowa, which is mostly just beautiful farmland, lots of space, decent people. And why would we have the most? It's because the governor has encouraged disregard for the rules. And so when you have your leaders encouraging people to be disrespectful, they will be disrespectful. It's just like Thomas Jefferson said, give the people light and they will show you the way. It's the leader's fault. The leaders have to lead, give people light, make them see, and make them go to, like Obama said, go to their better selves. And, Trump and Governor Reynolds and a lot of these other governors who are mostly Republicans are not doing their civic duty in a democracy. I lay the fault at at the feet of the people, of the leaders, not the people.
Mm-hmm. But let's discuss the leaders. You said Biden was not very popular and he was not mobilizing. I think that the polls were showing that. But what do you make? I mean, what about Trump? Trump is, I guess, very popular in the United States. Or
well,
okay.
Here he is. Well, if you look, actually, his approval ratings have constantly been less than his disapproval ratings. His approval is like 40, 42, and his disapproval is 50, 58. So most people don't like Trump.
Right. Now, no, what I meant is, sorry, he's popular among Republicans. So
yes.
How can you explain that?
Well, I'll tell you, I do have an explanation, and most people in democratic countries, well, we'll talk about the United States for now. They don't, I mean, this is hard for you and me and our listeners, our viewers to believe, but most people don't care about politics and they don't know anything about politics. They don't talk about it. They want to go play football or mow the lawn or, go to a cafe or just, pay their bills. Politics is a remote foreign thing. They don't think about it. What do they think about? I mean, when this is the public opinion, this is something important. Public opinion is inertial. That is to say, it almost never changes. Let me give you an example. And when Obama was running in 2008, there was a major study at Stanford University. 3,000 people scientifically sampled, and they were interviewed every month in the election year, from January till the election. They were interviewed every month. And it was a great survey. It was a scientific survey. Only 5% of the people in that survey changed their voting preference. They were interviewed, only 5%. Between Romney and Obama, only 5% changed. And this was despite an
and that's very interesting because in fact, I've seen the trend of average polls for both Biden and Trump, and 2020 practically didn't change their popularity. And if 2020 won't change the leader's popularity, nothing will.
Exactly. This is because the people, I mean, this is something I can't impress upon the listeners enough. As much as we're involved in politics and studying politics, it's our lifeblood, but most people don't know about it or care about it. So back to this question, which everybody asks me, many times a day, I don't know how someone could vote for Trump. Well, here's why. They vote for Trump because Trump is the only presidential candidate the Republicans are offering. In other words, they vote for Trump because he's the Republican candidate. The Republicans didn't have another candidate at the end of the day. They didn't have another Republican candidate. So people, so people who say they're Republicans, in other words, they have a psychological attachment to the party ongoing, which may not be deep, but it's real. I mean, people mostly have a preference. In any democracy, people mostly have a standing decision. When they think about voting, is basically the day before they go to the polls. And when they think about it, they just vote for whoever they voted for last time. So that's why most people are for Trump, is because he's the Republican candidate. And that's banal, but it's true. They are not, in other words, they're not fire breathers. Their leaders are fire breathers. It's the leadership that's culpable. It's the leadership that's put these people in the running. Why didn't Republican leaders do anything when they had this demented person who was a criminal in the race? Because they didn't have the guts to do anything. They could have stopped him. They just didn't stop him.
The parties have stopped working as gatekeepers, and this is the result.
Well said.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I think we've reached the end of our Lisbon talk for today. We went over a little bit of our time, but I think it was fully justified to what was been really interesting, as expected, a really interesting talk with you, Mike. And it's great to see you again, and everybody who was listening. and who ask questions. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Keep the faith. Keep the faith.
Speak soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.